Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amour de Soi Wellness, and Donovon Jenson is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my awesome co-host, Donovan. Today, we are talking about food and happiness. Such a wonderful thing, food. So, Donovan, what are your initial thoughts when it comes to food and happiness?
Yeah, so there's a couple different angles I think we could look at. One of them being sort of, I think food for a lot of people is a source of pleasure. It's like a nice thing, something they enjoy, something that like a lot of people are really passionate about and spend a lot of time with. And I think like on that angle, it's like the actual like personal relationship with food, right? Like how you individually enjoy it. But on the flip side of that same sort of thing, I know a lot of people struggle with like food in terms of dieting or being at the weight they want, or like if you have like health restrictions, like certain things that you can and can't eat, like that can be a struggle for people and cause a lot of unhappiness. And then another sort of separate angle that I would like to touch on at some point is sort of the social impacts of food. And by that I mean like a lot of times you're eating like with other people, like a very common thing to go do with a friend or something is to go out to lunch or dinner or whatever else. But those are the main topics that sort of spring to mind immediately for me. I'd be curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I was in a similar boat as you in that, generally like my first thought was food as happiness, as like treats and sweets or things that are special occasions that bring joy, and that could involve a social situation as well. But then I think about for long-term happiness, not necessarily providing me happiness in the moment, but just helping my mood and feeling better. That's where just eating healthy in general is helpful, but it's not as fun, doesn't create as much happiness, but generally can affect my mood. So that's a different angle I would explore. But would I describe myself as a foodie? I mean, maybe on occasion. I can be a little snobby about some things like pasta. I mean, I'll eat just like box pasta, but I've been to Italy, so I've had really good pasta. And so me and my husband can definitely be pasta snobs when we're trying to find an Italian restaurant in this area. And it's like when we actually achieve that and find one that is not necessarily Italy, but competitive with it, it definitely brings a lot of happiness. And it's not like we go there all the time, but it's a special occasion, an outing that we know will elicit a joyful response from us.
Yeah, that's sort of touches on another thing that I find interesting about food, which is like it can be how do I put this? Varying levels of like a novel experience or even just like a nice experience, right? Like it can be like I'm starving, I just need like a granola bar or like literally whatever's around, just give it to me and I'll eat it.
Yeah,
All the way up to like, hey, this is a very special occasion. I want to spend, or like I'm willing to spend. I don't know if anyone wants to, willing to spend like $100 a plate or whatever else to have like this really nice catered like luxury experience. And I feel like it's sort of unique in that sense that it sort of can like span the spectrum and be like at all these different levels of I guess they're just like experience, right? It's like just different kinds of experience
right.
all around sort of the same core thing.
Yeah, no, definitely. I just thought of one of I don't watch a lot of YouTube, but I do follow like a couple YouTubers that I do watch on a regular basis is Good Mythical Morning with Rhett and Link. And they're always like food taste testing. And what I thought of in when we're having this discussion is that a lot of times they're doing this one like game where they're testing the same food item from different price points. And that can like I've had like amazing food truck tacos that were like a couple bucks. And I've had expensive tacos that were a lot more and weren't as satisfying. So, and I've had it both ways. I've had really expensive, amazing tacos. And so it really varies depending on like the, what is my budget for one. And I think I can still find happiness within my budget, whether I'm planning to spend $10 or $50 on a meal. But it can really vary. I think it's just your personal experience, like how good does it taste to you? Maybe there's some like nostalgia involved with that. Like if it's something you ate as a child and that brings back positive memories, that brings happiness. Like when I eat French toast, that kind of elicits the memories from my childhood that are positive. But yeah, that it can go in a lot of different directions, even regardless of the price point.
I think a lot of the setting has like a big influence too, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
for me, for example, like if I'm going to a restaurant that has a dress code, whether or not I'm already in dress code, like that's already a bad sign for me that it's like not going to be the type of place that I want to be in because of the atmosphere, regardless of what the food is.
Yeah.
And I feel like in sort of the same way you mentioned like stuff from childhood, like there's certain foods that can evoke sort of like past memories of like nostalgia and stuff. Um, but it's not even necessarily the food itself. Like there's been a few times that I've had food that I enjoyed a lot in the past that like I feel like the food was better because I had all these other positive associations, not because like if I tried it fresh for the first time
Yeah.
today, I don't think that I would enjoy it as much because it doesn't have like all the rest of the history and background. And I feel like you hear people talking about like um some of that stuff with like comfort foods, right? Like that they're used to having or had as they were growing up that like they're extra good just because of all the other positive associations.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Definitely, I think comfort foods. Although that's a slippery slope because I think some people use their comfort foods as a coping mechanism for their depression or just feeling when they're sad or dealing with something stressful potentially. They kind of go to, and I'm guilty of this too, or even the opposite when you're like, oh, I just finished this amazingly big project. I deserve a treat. I deserve a reward. There's that piece too. And that can be dangerous if it's occurring a lot of the times. I think when you're mindful of it, it can be okay. But if you're just kind of that's your go-to plan on getting you in a better mood temporarily, that could be a slippery slope.
Yeah, I sort of talked about this before in terms of exercise, but diet falls in the same category where like it's really easy with a lot of foods to think you're on one path, but if you're not paying attention or tracking it or like or not seeing like results that you like, a lot of times you can be on a very very different path than what you think you're actually on, and it's it can be disheartening for some people because it's like not necessarily fun to like I'm going to have one Oreo. I'm going to make sure that I write this out and put it in my tracker. Okay, I had like it can take out a lot of the enjoyment for a lot of people because it pulls you, or at least like from personal experience, pulls me out of sort of the mindfulness of enjoying the actual
Right.
item sometimes, unless I'm like very consciously on top of like, cool, I put the stuff in. Now I'm going to focus on sort of enjoying this for what it is. But I think that's one of the common traps that people fall into that can really limit their happiness. And I guess it's a couple different things, right? It's either like you're having a lot more of these treats or whatever else than you think you are, and so your health outcomes are not as good as you would hope. Or I see a lot of people get stuck being like extremely strict and in a way that they're like, I can never have this. I'm so frustrated. I want this so bad. Like they sort of like obsess about how they're not able to have it.
Right.
But I feel like those are two, they're both sort of like wrapped into the same thing. And one of the ways you can get stuck being unhappy around food.
Absolutely. Yeah, I could see that. Have you heard of the term orthorexia, which is it's an eating disorder where you're like hyper focused on eating healthy, like do a over the top. And I've seen it definitely in my profession, for both other doctors or clients. And you know, I mean, for me, it's like I like to have a balance. It's tricky, you know, food. I don't like to track. I don't like to do all the things I recommend my patients do, but I want to give myself as well as my patients like a little bit of like freedom and leeway. So maybe it's like, okay, let's be on track 6 out of 7 days of the week, and then you get like one day where you have like the freedom to be flexible. And so having like the right balance, maybe it has to be a different ratio for different people, but having more of a balance so you have a little bit of that freedom and be able to enjoy those pleasurable foods without the guilt associated with it.
Yeah, I feel like that sort of the way I frame it, like an 80-20 approach type of thing. Like I feel like that works for a lot of people. Just knowing that like there's going to be that balance. I know for me personally, what's been really helpful, and it's sort of the same thing, but I think it's, at least for me, framed slightly differently, which is like I don't feel like I ever restrict myself, but I often choose not to have things that are unhealthy. And it seems like really subtle. But there was times when I was like, okay, I'm not, like I can't eat this. I can't eat, like when I had that sort of mental chatter, it was much harder for me until I changed it to like, I can eat this if I want.
Right.
Like I can eat this sugary treat if I want. I can eat 10 cookies if I want.
Right.
But like then I also have to deal with the rest of the consequences. Like I have to deal with a
Yes,
stomach ache. I have to deal
exactly.
with fighting my weight. I have to deal with like whatever else. And somehow just giving myself like more agency has allowed me to stick with things a little bit better. I know that it's not going to be
Yeah.
effective for everyone, but for me, that's something that's helped a lot.
No, I know that can work for a lot of people, especially it's actually kind of like the new, or I don't know how new it is, but my friend recently did Weight Watchers again after a while, and he had said he had a lot of success. He's lost a lot of pounds, and he hasn't it doesn't restrict you from eating anything at all. It's more of a point system. You have X amount of points. So if you like eat a piece of cake, that's like gonna max out your points for the day, so you don't get to eat much much else. Well, you can eat like a bunch of 0 point items like eggs or vegetables, things like that, but it kind of limits you so you're not like overdoing it. Because I know for myself, when I'm not really tracking or being super mindful, it's like, oh, well, I haven't had a piece of cake in over a week, so let's have it today. And then the next day, it's like, oh, well, I haven't had a burger in a few weeks. And then the next day, it's like, well, I haven't had pizza in a while. But it's like, it's one thing after another. It might not be the same thing, but if I'm not paying attention, I definitely give myself too much slack, probably.
Yeah, I mean it's easy to do, right? Like if
Yeah.
you're just relying on your memory, it's going to
Right.
be fuzzy, and it's very easy for you to be like, "Oh, I mean, I've had instances where sort of what you're describing where it's like, "Oh, I haven't had a burger in forever." And then I have the burger and then I think for a minute, I'm like, "I had a burger like 2 days ago. What am I talking about?" Like,
Yeah.
wait a minute. Like this is completely wrong and I just forgot. But
Yeah.
I think that's just like a natural experience if you're not, tracking and don't have a way to look back. But again, for a lot of people, doing that like tracking stuff can also be discouraging or take like some of the joy out of it. So it's all about like, at least from what I've seen, trying different things until you find something that feels kind of easy. I think that's a big piece of it, right? Like anytime I see someone struggling with the way they're trying to eat, if especially if it's like longer than the first couple weeks, because sometimes it takes a couple weeks to like
Yeah.
find a groove or like settle into it. I don't think it's going to be effective in the long term if you're still struggling with it, because that every day you're spending so much energy. Like, should I eat this? Should I not? Like every time I've seen people be successful with diet or eating in a way that makes them happy, it seems easy. Like they may have a couple instances of like, should I have this? No, I'm okay. But overall, like it feels a lot less effortful. But I also feel like it takes many people a lot of time to find something that actually works.
Yeah. Yeah. And that might change and evolve over time as you kind of figure out what works. And sometimes you have something work really well for a few weeks or a few months, and then it's like you get tired of it. So you do need to change the plan up. Like, for example, my own personal journey, I generally eat healthy, try to, like, restrict the starchy carbs and eat more protein. But with pregnancy, it's changed that, because it's like, oh, I gotta eat more carbs, or I've got to eat, and then there's cravings, and then there's aversions, and there's things. So it's changed my, like, I'm not as restrictive as I used to be, or mindful, because I'm actually needing to gain weight in pregnancy, and that makes it hard. It's like, is this the right amount of weight gain? Is this not? Am I, like, and there was a point where I wasn't gaining enough weight, so it kind of almost let the reins loose to a dangerous level of me kind of going off the handle. But then I decided, like, okay, I'm not focusing on, like, the calorie count or the type of food. My main focus is, like, just getting at least one vegetable in a day. It was like, get something healthy in for the day. It's kind of like my primary goal, as far as eating. So I don't feel as restrictive, but also I do kind of pay more attention, with, like, out of all the meals I ate today, how healthy would I rate them? But yeah, we've actually cut back on eating out a lot in the last month or so, just to save money. And that, I think, has been useful in different ways, and having to cook and prepare food more.
Speaking of which, let's talk about that a little bit, because I feel like that's another angle that people can end up unhappy from, which is eating out a lot and then not having disposable income in the places that they want to have it. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I have I won't say anyone specifically, but there's a number of people I know that are often frustrated with how much money they have, and
Right.
yet they never cook, they never eat at home. Like, I mean, eating out can be like 5 to 10 to 15 times more expensive than eating at home.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I've been through those phases where I'm just like, oh, I'm too lazy and tired to cook or prepare anything. So I literally go to, like, the nugget market every single day for lunch. It's so bad. And then, yeah, and of course they're not cheap. That's the, like, nugget, if for those who are listening, it's kind of like a Whole Foods. So it's like fancier upscale. And I never, like, do my actual grocery shopping there. I don't get a cart or anything. It's like, go in, get something quick for lunch, and then leave, because it's pretty good. But yeah, that's it's a slippery slope. And yeah, when I start to notice that, then it's time to kind of pull back a little.
And I don't know how that specific store is set up, but I know that, like, a lot of restaurants and fast food places and whatnot are crafting food in a way that's going to be unhealthy because it's more palatable, right? Like, it tastes better.
Yeah.
So if you're eating out often, if you're not really mindful and on top of it and really making, like, specific choices, it can be very, very hard to eat in a way that's in alignment with, like, your health.
Yeah.
Or if you're having, if you're trying to manage your weight, like, you can end up with tons more calories than you expect, because making even the same thing at home, like, it's going to be made, the same item is going to be made in a different way that is just higher up on calories or salt or whatever other things, and you have to really pay attention, otherwise you can end up in a spot that you don't want to be.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So, oh, do you want to explore the social aspects of food and happiness? I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did want to comment. I just was remembering from med school, one of the things that we had to do is an elimination diet, which isn't like a diet about losing weight, although that can be, like, the added side benefit. It's more about figuring out your food sensitivity. So it is a diet that I recommend to a lot of my patients. And so we had to go through it ourselves. And I remember, like, wasn't too bad or hard. I mean, the hardest thing for me typically is taking out the sugar, but like the other big items is like dairy and gluten, which weren't too bad to take out for me. So I don't do a whole lot generally. But the hardest part of that diet was feeling limited socially. I felt isolated and I was feeling depressed because it's like, well, nobody's going to want to eat what I'm eating. Although I have a different mindset about that. I think I could find plenty of people that would eat. If I cooked it, they would eat it. And I could create something delicious and within that. But back then, like this is over 10 years ago, like 15 years ago almost. I was like, oh, I can't, like, nobody will eat anything. I can't eat out. I can't eat what people are eating. So they don't want to eat what I'm eating. It just felt very isolating. And that was really depressing for me. And that was probably the hardest part, not necessarily taking out the foods, but just like not having that social interaction.
Yeah, because I think first of all, there's a ton of different experiences that you can have with people that have food with them, right? It's not like just going out to eat, but it's like, hey, so and so brought this in, like these treats, or like, hey, I made this, or you want to come to a barbecue, or like, there's all these different places that food shows up,
Right.
and like you're saying, I feel like it can be an inherently isolating experience to not feel like you can participate, but then also, at least in my experience, a lot of those have social pressure too in ways that can be like extra frustrating or isolating, like,
Right.
oh yeah, I know you're on a diet or whatever, but like you're not fat, so just like eat this, or like
Yeah.
just have one, or whatever else. Like there's oftentimes a lot of social pressure in a negative direction.
Or you're offending the person who made it
Yep.
if you don't eat it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like it can compound in that way. In the same way as like when a lot of people I feel like experiences when they don't want to drink anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's the same sort of social pressure or like social engagement where it's like, hey, like have some of this stuff. And it can be really hard to maintain sort of the boundaries that you want. One thing that sort of has worked for me a little bit, and I know 100% for sure will not work for other people. But sometimes I've found some space in just like having a very, very small portion, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, cool, you made cookies. Sure, I'll have like a bite of one. Like, let me break off a tiny piece.
Yeah.
And being a little bit more flexible. Mostly, I guess what I'm getting at is I found when I'm extremely rigid in what I'm trying to do, it can sometimes be more difficult. And when I'm like a tiny bit flexible, it doesn't impact my goals really, right? It's like not even 80-20, it's like 99-1 or like 99.9.1, right? It's like 16 cookie calories, of like a nibble is not going to make a big difference. But again, I know that's like not always the case. Like there can be tons of reasons. And it's also wild to me when someone tries to put pressure on someone to eat a specific thing when it's like a health related thing. Like, nope, I'm allergic to seafood. Like I really don't want to try that.
Shouldn't. Yeah. Yeah. I generally, when I have patients doing the elimination diet, they do have to be like super strict for X amount of weeks. And so it is limiting, but I think it's like, one, you got to create your boundaries and just like, don't give a fuck what people think kind of a thing. You can bring your own food and eat whatever you bring, and just kind of explain what you're doing and why you're doing this. And you could say, hey, this isn't permanent. This is just like, I want to see how this impacts my health. And that's what I'm up to right now. And hopefully if they're decent friends, they'll respect and honor that request.
Yeah, I think it can be a good indicator of relationships when you are trying to do something different than your friends or family or whoever it is, and they're either supportive or not. Like I had not awesome people around me for so long that I didn't even know that there are circles that you could run in where like you can pretty much be working on whatever you're working on and people will support you as opposed to try to like mold you back into sort of their habits and whatnot.
Yeah.
But nowadays, when I see stuff like that, when I'm like at a larger social gathering or just like don't know people very well, like to me that is a strong indicator of sort of a pattern. Obviously, if it's just one thing, it's not a pattern, but like often people who are not willing to support certain like lifestyle choices or diet choices or whatever else are drive a hard line on a lot of other things.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and from the opposite perspective, once I was able to, because I used to be more
Mm-hmm.
like the people I was around, right? Like I used to have more harsh opinions of what I thought other people should do,
Mm-hmm.
and more over time, as I realize how what's useful or not for me, I've tried to like open up more space too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's no, for example, like I'm not vegan, but there was a time where I was like, how can you possibly get your, and I'm sure this is like a very common response, but like how can you get all the vitamins you need? How can you get like the nutrients and resources and whatever
Yeah.
else?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now it would be from more of a genuine place.
Mm-hmm.
Then it was more from like a you're this doesn't seem like it's gonna work place.
Right.
Um, and just over time I've tried to create like more and more space around supporting people through their diets or eating habits or however you want to call it,
Mm-hmm.
uh, as opposed to trying to impose the sets of things that have worked for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely trying to impose your stuff doesn't generally work very well for most people. And it kind of just rubs them the wrong way. And I think it's, sort of like religion. If someone were to push their like dietary habits on you, it would not be well received. Um, but you can honor and respect. Hey, do you, boo. It's kind of like whatever you want to do, or if you feel like that's what's right for you, then go ahead and keep doing that. I'm not going to get in the way as long as it doesn't, as long as I don't have to change what I have to eat, what I can eat, then I'm cool. Cool with it. Kind of a situation.
Yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind that like everyone's eating habits are going to be different and
Mhm.
everyone's goals are different. I mean, some
Yeah.
people have the same goals, but like there
Yeah.
can be many different types of goals.
Mhm.
Um, because like things for me like what like extended periods of fasting,
Mhm.
I was like that's nuts. Like I that's crazy
Yeah.
in the past, but now I'm realizing like cool, not everyone is doing like strenuous exercise every day or every other day.
Mhm.
Like some people feel a lot better fasting. I just know, but like for me, when I tried to do a 24-hour fast plus my workouts, like that was horrible. Like
Mhm.
I felt so sick and just awful and weak. But like that's because my goals were different than what some of the other people were doing. Like
Yeah.
some people are doing stuff like that for like what just like personal choice reasons. Some of them are doing it for like health reasons. Some people are making choices for fitness reasons. Like
Mhm.
it really depends on what the person is trying to do. And so I've learned over time what I'm doing is not necessarily reflective of like what other people are trying to accomplish. And that's helped me again create more space to be like open to things and supportive instead of drawing these hard lines and boundaries that I used to.
Yeah, no, definitely. Even I, as like a doctor, I had like definitely certain opinions about certain diets. I was like, I don't know about that, including fasting, until I took a continuing ed course on it and actually learned about more of the health benefits. And I was like, oh, and that was actually like never, like I had attempted a fast, like a juice fast, like when I was in med school too. And it didn't go over well. And I was just very cranky and angry. And I don't think I did it correctly either now that I reflect back. But then when I had like a certain protocol and a structure and understood the benefits and like how to like get through it without being super terrible of a person or survive it, it made more sense. And so I actually was able to do like I think it was a 5-day fast, which was insane. I like 5 years ago, I would have like, there's no way I could do that. But it's like you taper down like the juice and the water intake. Like you start with a high amount of juice and then it like, and you do like 50-50 juice and then you do like 10 90 like water to juice ratio, and then you go back up, and it's a lot easier that way. Although the hardest part was when I was doing it, we went to a outdoor concert and there was just like all this food around, and if I could just avoid all the smells of different foods, I'd be perfectly fine. But that was probably one of the harder challenges, is being around food and smelling it. But yeah, that's generally what I've noticed.
Yeah, I think you sort of touched on it a little bit, but finding a way of eating or habits or whatever else that doesn't feel super oppressive is the only thing that I feel like can work in the long term. Like if you were going to do that same thing for or pretend you're going to do it forever, like at some point in the not too far future, you would have been like, no way, this smells way too good, I'm done. Like but I do also think it's extremely useful to do smaller experiments of certain things to see how foods are impacting you. Because there can be things that are slowing you down or having impacts that you're just not aware of. Like, for example, I used to drink a ton of milk with protein shakes and stuff. And I also used to get nauseous all the time. And I never put it together until years and years later, when for other reasons I had just sort of like slowly switched off of cow's milk to almond milk. I just ended up liking the taste better and stuff. But now I realize, like, if I consume high amounts of dairy, I get sick. And I did not know that. Like, I would just like, I'm just a person who gets nauseous, like, somewhat regularly. And like, whatever, I don't know what to do about it. But there's no way I could have known that without changing something in my diet. And I feel like there are a lot of examples of people sort of switching things out or trying different variations and realizing that there's a lot larger impact that they haven't noticed because it's just your baseline.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's kind of what I have people do on the elimination diet. It's like, I generally tell them, I'm not saying you have to take out this food forever, but you just have to take it out temporarily and then introduce it and see if it has any effect or reaction. And then and then you can decide, is it worth it or not? If it's creating like maybe a little bit of a runny nose, okay, maybe once in a while might be worth it. If it's creating like massive exploding diarrhea, maybe it's not. So you get to choose. It's your choice, but knowing how foods impact how you feel can definitely influence your health and your overall happiness and well-being.
Another thing to layer on top of that is I think it can be useful too to just like change up what you're eating, right? Just like try new things occasionally for sort of the same reason but in a different dimension, which is to say that like sometimes trying new foods, you can find something that makes you feel really good in a way that you didn't know was possible, or just like give you another option for something you like when you're in either like social settings or like other restricted sort of settings. I just know that there are like some subset of people who rarely try new foods or change up their eating habits. And one of the most successful things I found for myself in being able to eat healthier is trying new things. And then when I find something I really like, being able to substitute something that I know for sure is less healthy out for this new thing that I've been able to find. And by doing that, like really slowly, I was able to improve my diet a lot, because slowly, just over time, I'd be like, okay, like I can take this thing out and I like this thing just as much. Instead of like I'm cutting everything out, or like this is a whole giant change, or like I was able to just like slowly rebuild my habits. And so it's something that I try to still do, is just like keep trying new stuff, and every once in a while I'll be like, I've been eating this pretty regularly and it's just not like, I know this other thing is going to be healthier for me.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I think we covered this topic pretty well. Were there any final thoughts you had before we wrap up?
Nope.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in today. We appreciate you. And if you appreciate us, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and help spread the happiness in the world. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and then go and subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you get notified when the next video comes out. If you check out in the description below, go to my website where you can get my free fast and easy guide to stress relief.
Thanks again for checking us out, and we'll see you next time.